The Bible Treasury. A monthly magazine of papers on scriptural subjects. Volume 19, Article 1, Part 5 of 60, 1892 and 1893. The Early Chapters of Genesis. By William Kelly. Genesis 1 verses 9 to 13. This publication is scarcely the suited place, nor does the writer pretend, to draw out adequately the wondrous and beneficent functions of the separated waters or seas and of the dry land, any more than of the light and of the atmospheric heavens, on which a little has been said. But a few words here may confirm, what was remarked as to the first and the second days, that the record speaks with immediate propriety of God's constituting the earth for the human race. By no means does it intimate particulars of the long periods before man when those successive changes are observable, which laid down vast stores for his future use and fitted the earth's progressively built-up crust, the rich field of geological research. One can admire the wisdom which did not encumber the Bible with the details of natural science. Rocks crystalline and stratified are before men's eyes, who can reason on the fossils they embalm. Scripture alone avoids the universal heathen idea of a primitive chaos and the philosophic error of an eternal universe or even eternal matter. Scripture, on the contrary, has carefully enunciated God's creation at an undefined moment, in the beginning, not merely of crude materials, but of the heavens and the earth, without a word about their denizens. It also makes known the fact that the earth was subjected to revolution so complete that before the Adamic state of things divine power was needed to cause light to act in a diurnal way, as well as to order the atmosphere, and from a previous and universal overspread of waters the appearance of dry land, on which God began the plants or vegetable kingdom for man. Thus the work of these days wholly leaves out, because chronologically it follows, the vast operations both of slow construction and of destruction which give special interest to the geologist. Original creation and subsequent dislocation, which swept away in due time whole species and genera of organized beings, followed by fresh and different ones, and this repeatedly, it asserts distinctly, and both, before the days which prepared all for his life and probation under divine government who was created ere the week closed. The document itself furnishes the warrant to the believer for taking the first verse indefinitely before the 6 days, and also for affirming the state, possibly final state, of confusion into which the earth passed before it became the world as it now is. There may indeed be some analogy between the days that concern the earth of the human race and those immense ages of ripening advance which preceded, so as to furnish a slight ground of resemblance on which not a few men of ingenuity and the best intentions have reared their various schemes for accommodating the days to the geological ages. Yet this hypothesis, even when guarded by the most cautious and competent aid of science, does not square with Scripture. It is unjustifiable in every point of view to confound the disturbed state of verse 2 with the creation of the earth described in ver. 1, which it really follows, disorder after order. Is it not even absurd to identify ver. 3 with either? Each follows consecutively, and the long tracts of time, if filled up in a way that Scripture does not essay, would come in after verse 1, and before verse 3, which wholly differing from what precedes, introduces a new condition where alone details are given to mark God's direct dealings with man. Hence the days, from verse 3 and onward, are wholly misapplied to the geologic ages. Where for this scheme have we the formation of the plutonic, volcanic, and metamorphic rocks? Where the upheaval of the mountain ranges and the tracing of the river systems? Where the succession of organic remains, marine and terrestrial, vegetable and animal, new ones following those extinguished, and mutually distinct, from the Laurentian beds to the post-Pliocene or Quaternary? The 6 days set forth the peculiar constitution God was pleased to establish for the existing or human world. What the geologic periods embrace is successive remodelings of the earth where sea and land have changed place, mountains were raised and valleys scooped, perhaps again and again, not only a sweeping away of old organic creation, but an introduction of new plants and animals, each assemblage confessed even by Lyell to admirably fit the new states of the globe, with singular varieties all pointing by harmony of parts and beauty of contrivance to one divine Maker. These days only begin, when God, having closed the long undefined periods of progressive character, with repeated extermination of their correspondingly changed flora and fauna, forms, within the brief span of human labor, that system, inorganic and organic of which man is the appointed head, but enriched by all he had slowly deposited and rendered available to man's industry and profit by that dislocation which laid bare treasures so remote and manifold, so interesting and important. The divine operations of the third day call for more detail than that which was last before us. They form a double class, as does the work of the sixth day. And God said, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered together to one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let the earth sprout grass, herb producing seed, fruit trees yielding fruit after their kind, the seed of which is in them, on the earth." And it was so. And the earth sprouted grass, herb producing seed after its kind, and trees yielding fruit, the seed of which is in them after their kind. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, a third day, verses 9 to 13. We have seen light, involving heat, caused to act for the Adamic earth, and that atmosphere which sustains an enormous body of waters above those that lie below, both of them results of essential importance for what was coming, and of course adapted by divine power and wisdom to the system in which the human race were to exist. It was needless and foreign for a divine revelation to explain how these and other works of God were effected. The important truth for his people, and for every soul of man, to know, is that he is both the originator and the maker of all. No student of geology doubts mechanical any more than chemical agency on the largest scale in forming the crust of the earth. Heat, water, and air have played their part under his hand in change, and waste, and progressive formation. But it is only the petty and pedantic unbelief of some who cry up such gradual secondary causes as are now seen, shutting out the evidence, which geology itself affords to candid minds, of repeated and enormous transformations, and all but entire revolution of organic life, in both extinction and new creation, with the corresponding change of the globe and its temperature which this implies, and each of these not for a brief space but for ages before the earth of man. Facts plainly enough point to these conclusions for those who occupy themselves with the natural antiquities of the earth. Nor can it be doubted that each successive tale inscribed on the fossiliferous rocky tablets of the earth shows on the whole distinct progress, in no way as mere development of the antecedent condition, but the fresh fruit of creative acts, even if some species seem renewed for the subsequent phase, and all with evident relation to the earth as it was to be for Adam, and as it will be when the second man takes it with the universe itself for his inheritance. Unity of plan marks all from first to last. But all this bygone succession of physical change is only left room for in the revealed word which dwells on man and Emmanuel. Geological detail in Scripture would have been as much out of place as any other science, but how can the room left for all, in what is said, be accounted for save as implying the knowledge of all by him who revealed his word? An original creation of the heavens and the earth without details, and unlimited even by myriads of years, in the beginning, perfectly falls in with every ascertained fact, and a violent dislocation of the earth, of the highest importance for the race in its disarrangements, altogether different from and more thorough than any diluvial or merely superficial action, is also made known, followed by that making of heaven and earth which is historically described in Genesis 1 verses 3 to 31 and referred to solemnly in Exodus 20 verse 11. It is pertinent to observe that the effort to interpret the days of the immense ages before man, separates Adam from his historic time as well as the creation placed under him as its head. For according to the long periods of geology, what would the fossil plants of the third day have to do with those that grew on the Adamic earth? And so with the animals on the fifth day, if not the sixth. On the contrary, the 6 days were plainly meant to convey a realm of creation immediately connected with Adam, the various forms of organic nature being subjected and given to him. The 6th day is thus made geologic as well as historical. Surely this does not hang together, any more than our having a detailed account of fossil creation, and none at all of that which seems the express object of the several days, the creation in view of the incoming race. Now in a divine revelation it is easy to understand, passing over all particulars of the fossilis stages of the earth, but inconceivable that there should be no account of heaven and earth and sea and all that in them is, in connected relation to Adam and his sons, especially as out of the thousands of organized species in the secondary rocks, not a single species, says Professor Hitchcock, corresponds with any now living, and even out of the thousands in the tertiary, but few seem identical. With living species the natural and only reasonable conclusion is that, whatever the analogy with the divine action in past geologic time, the days speak solely of what God made in immediate view of Adam, not of fossils, animal or vegetable, but of the organic beings placed under Adam and his race, with their surroundings and suited system. To suppose both is nothing but confusion. Returning to the day before us, we see a fresh operation of God for man's world, the waters under the heavens collected to one place, and dry land consequently appearing. Not that such a separation had not existed before, but that the disruption, wise and benevolent for the earth of man, made it a necessary act now, as indeed in a general way everything had to be made afresh for Adam, a disruption wholly distinct from the vague and useless chaos which the heathen imagined. Now God formed the earth and seas in the condition which substantially abides to our days. How momentous an act for the race needs few words to explain. That both earth and seas had existed previously no geologist disputes, any more than the various phases of both according to the plants and animals that prevailed from one geologic age to another. Doubtless also, save for dead-level uniformitarians if there be such, the epochs of change that destroyed the older creatures and beheld new races modified greatly both the earth and the seas, for each period had its own proper system, with changes in inorganic matter, water, atmosphere, temperature, and the like, corresponding to each new set of organized beings. The earth then was to have that form for the most part which God saw best fitted for his new purpose, vast continents and vaster oceans, islands large and small, lakes salt and fresh, swamps and torrents, mountains and rivers, plains greater or less, and valleys not merely affected by gradual erosion but often by deep and sudden dislocation. It is common knowledge what a part is played in the physical economy of the world by the seas, which in Hebrew idiom embrace all large collections of waters, oceans, seas, lakes, and even rivers, as well as by the varied disposition of the land, high or low. To this the disarrangement of Genesis 1 verse 2 had directly contributed, as now in the separation of earth and seas after having been commingled for a time. Rapid extraordinary operations wrought, and of course slow and existing causes, in bringing about what was then done for man, but here we learn that God laid down the great landmarks which abide to this day. Genesis 2 verses 11 to 14 is enough to indicate that men attribute to the deluge or other changes more than can be proved. God gave names to, as to the objects of his work on the previous days. But there is a second part of his work to notice, vegetable nature for the earth that now is, that kingdom which mediates between minerals and animals. God commanded the earth to bring forth grass, or, sprouts, see note, herb seeding seed, fruit trees yielding fruit after its kind, which has its seed in itself after its kind, as is said here most emphatically. This is the true origin of vegetable species for the Adamic earth. And as God pronounced good the dry land and the seas, so now the beautiful clothing of the dry land, and the abundant supplies for man and beast, at first indeed the exclusive food even for man. Note. There may be a question whether the peculiar phrase here does not mean the general term sprouts expanded into herbs and fruit trees, as some learned men have inferred. The substantive has a wider meaning than grass which it frequently signifies, but I am not aware of any other application so extensive as to justify that generic forge. If meant here it is peculiar. End of note. How does the protracted scheme of the days as geologic periods agree with the vegetable kingdom on the third day, and the animal even in its lowest forms on the fifth? Is it really so with the evidence of fossils? The coal measures indicate vast brackens, ferns, etc., but what of fruit trees bearing fruit according to each several kinds? Certainly, it would seem that zoophytes are as early as any vegetable remains, long before the Carboniferous era, so paraded as the fulfillment of the third day, after a great abundance of marine animals far beyond plants, of which direct evidence appears in the rocks. If the days are taken simply in reference to Adam, there is no difficulty on any such score, as the provision for the world that now is appeared with no interval such as geology can appreciate. How absurd, taking the third day before us as our example, for us to identify it with the Carboniferous age, or that which laid the basis for the coal measures. What real analogy between coal plants, chiefly acrogens, and the grass, herb, tree, so manifestly for the food of animals, above all of man? What with herb, in general, producing seed, and what with fruit trees yielding fruit after their kind, the seed of which is in them? This is evidently not provision for coal, but for the food and refreshment of man and cattle, of bird and beast. The analogy vanishes when looked into. For geologic eras it is a failure, for man's world, it is the simple and suited truth. It was plant life for Adam's earth. The Carboniferous era, when people have been content with facts, was the age, botanically, of cryptogams and gymnosperms, in the animal realm of the earlier reptiles, batrachian or amphibian. Now does this truly correspond with the third day? With the formation of seas and the emergence of dry land? And this clothed with verdure, herbs, and fruit trees, each propagating after its kind? Beyond just doubt, Moses means herbs, not of the Carboniferous age, but solely of the earth for man, animal life for it not existing till the fifth day. Compare verse 29. But the geologic evidence points to plants and animals even in Archean time, for as the simplest animal forms, rhizopods, have been detected in the Laurentian rocks, so the enormous quantity of graphite, being carbon, implies abundant vegetation, seaweeds, and lichens. The metamorphism of the rocks may account for the rare indications of organic life even in the Huronian beds which were subsequent, but according to what is generally averred, Paleozoic time goes farther back than even the Silurian age, upper and lower, the era of fucoids on the one hand and of marine invertebrate animals on the other, protozoans, radiates, mollusks, and articulates. Then comes the Devonian, or age of fishes, chiefly Selacian and ganoid, and some insects, in addition to previous invertebrates, and, besides seaweeds, columnites, conifers, ferns, and lycopods. Surely long ages with organic life, not only vegetable but animal, before the Carboniferous period, as all geologists accept, disprove beyond controversy the effort to make out the third day therein fulfilled. Hence Principal Dawson, Arch 168, is obliged to own that the coal flora, consisting mainly of cryptogams allied to ferns and club mosses, and of gymnosperms allied to the pines and cycads, cannot coalesce with the higher orders of plants called into being in our verses 11 and 12. For these reasons, says he, we are shut up to the conclusion that this flora of the third day must have its place before the Paleozoic period of geology, i.e. when vegetation was incomparably lower than that of the coal measures. The true conclusion, on the contrary, is that the third day's work implies a flora for man and the creatures under him, long after the coal measures. By the way, Dawson remarks that the sacred writer specifies 3 descriptions of plants as included in it. The first he will have to be not grass, but the cryptogamia, as fungi, mosses, lichens, ferns, etc., then seed-bearing herbs, and fruit-bearing trees. The cryptogams may well be doubted. If tenable, it might be pleaded even more fairly that the phainogams, endogenous and exogenous, follow. However, it would seem that no scientific classification is intended, but a general division which all could observe into grass, herbs, and fruit trees, each species nonetheless expressly and permanently reproductive. In point of fact, it is not till the Cretaceous period of Mesozoic time that we find the first traces of angiosperms, oak, plane, fig, etc., so that the reference to an age before the Paleozoic time is still less reasonable than the hypothesis of the Carboniferous era. Doubtless, geologists would, if they could, make verses 11 and 12 subsequent to the great operations of the fourth day, for who can question the all-importance not of light only but of the sunbeam for herbage of all kinds, for fruit-bearing, and for timber? This is no difficulty for one who takes the days as the evening and the morning, but is it not insuperable for all who regard them as representing ages of untold duration? The Archean rocks, we must bear in mind, are believed to be near 5 miles thick, the Silurian system considerably thicker, especially if we add the Devonian. Then come the Carboniferous and Permian formations of not far from 4 miles, and after the Triassic and Jurassic the Cretaceous, when it would seem that angiosperms or dicotyledons began to appear, rose, apple, elm, etc. In fact, it was only just before the Tertiary or Cainozoic, if we include in it, as most do, the nummulitic beds. Who can reckon the times of these formations? There is another observation of importance to make. What Scripture reveals of the third day's work points in no way to Archean or Paleozoic times, but simply and naturally to the formation of the Adamic earth. Geology tells us that the continents while still beneath the waters began to take shape, then, as the seas deepened, that the first dry land appeared, low, barren, and lifeless, next that, under intestine and external action, the dry land expanded, strata formed, and mountains rose, each in its appointed place, till finally heights and continents reached their fullest development. Now the flora described by the inspired writer does not fit the geologic first appearance of dry land, when of the character above described, till the mountains rose ages afterwards and river systems followed. To say the least, marked advance of state is involved in the flora described by Moses. How then identify it with the earliest geologic time when seaweeds alone existed in the waters, along with lichens on the land, and even then the Eozoan rhizopod? Moses describes just such a vegetable kingdom in its main features as Adam had, and we have now. It was vegetation as he knew it, and God led him so to describe it, being the truth. Is there then contradiction between the more or less satisfactory conclusions of geology and unerring Scripture? In no way. Distinguish the times, and clashing disappears. The third day speaks solely of the earth's last emergence from the waters by which it was submerged long ages after the original outlining of the land and water determining the earth's general configuration. Dr. Dana on reconsideration should acknowledge that the idea of life expressed in the lowest plants and afterwards, if not contemporaneously, in the lowest or systemless animals, the protozoans, is doubly and hopelessly incongruous with the Mosaic record. Take it as of the Adamic week, and all is plain to the believer if a few difficulties remain for the geologist. Why should any wonder, since it is confessed by the same competent authority that a broken record the geological undoubtedly is, especially for terrestrial life? Dana's Manual of Geology, 601, 3rd edition, 1875. Not so with the Bible, which, being divine, is and most be true, plain for the wayfaring man, profound for the most informed and best cultured.